Well, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone, and welcome to my YouTube channel, Buddhist Biohacker, and welcome to our Siddhis series. I am super excited for today. I've been looking forward to it for weeks. We are going to do 6 mini episodes today, back to back, myself and the amazing Julie Hoyle, and we are going to explore the fascinating world of the Siddhis. What are the Siddhis? They're mystical abilities described in yoga, Buddhism, and spiritual traditions worldwide. These aren't just stories about supernatural powers. Siddhis are symbols of what unfolds as consciousness deepens. Together, Julie and I are going to explore the meaning of the Siddhis. What is their allure? What are their dangers? And what is the potential for sacred transformation? I'll be joined by Julie Hoyle, spiritual teacher, author, an incredible, incredible being on the planet Earth. And together, we're going to open up this conversation with all of you to weave ancient wisdom and modern experience. So we're going to begin now by asking the question, what are the Siddhis? Hello.
Hey there.
I'm so excited and welcome. I see everybody joining in the live already. So please feel free to share where you're from, how you're feeling. And of course, please share your own experiences and ask questions as we go. And Julie, I know you and I both were excited to talk about the Siddhis because I think we've experienced some of these, and I really wanted to talk about supernatural powers with you. I feel like it's such a juicy topic. So I don't care where we start, but we're going to start. Episode 1 is really, what are they? Like, what is the difference between an ordinary ability and an extraordinary ability? And I'd love to hear your thoughts on all of this.
Yeah, so one of the places that might be a great place to start is starting from a place of ignorance, which is where I was as a kid, because I started experiencing the Siddhis when I was, I don't know, maybe 4 or 5 or even younger. And 2 of those in particular. One is where, and oftentimes it would happen at night when I was about to, I was in between that stage of falling asleep, but being awake, falling asleep, and then really moving into deep dreams. And I would feel like I got really, really infinitesimally small, really, really tiny. And that used to happen consistently. And the other thing that happened is just the opposite, where I'd be falling asleep and I would feel the limitations, or the belief in the limitation of being, the body and all of that would dissolve. And then this expansion would happen. And the expansion would move beyond the 4 walls, and it would keep going and going and going and going. And I realized I was all of that. And so, I never told anybody about that, of course. And it really didn't make sense, but it felt absolutely natural. And then it wasn't until many years later that I realized both of those are, in the list of siddhis. I think one is called anima and one is mahima, if I'm getting that right. I think, how does it go? Is it anima is the small one and mahima, or it's the other way around? I forget. But but they're in the 8 classical siddhis list, and they really are denoting a shift of consciousness or an expansion of consciousness or wakefulness or whatever you want to call it. So they're signs of self-recognition that are really inherent in the whole sort of unfolding path.
Yeah, I love that. And for me, it was the lightness, the levitation. I remember being a little kid, and same thing, when you're going to sleep, there's definitely that. And I have to say, this morning, when the dream state's good, you just want to be in it. And even this morning, it was an interesting way to kick off the day when I knew you and I were going to connect, because I could just slip back into the lucid dream state. And I just kept doing that. I had the luxury of doing that for several hours this morning, to almost 10 o'clock this morning. It was hard to get out of bed because it was like, ooh, the energy is so good. I don't want to leave it. But anyways, when I was a little kid, that same thing, like about to go to sleep, and I could feel my body lifting off the bed. And it wasn't until years and years later that I realized that was also a siddhi. And I think it's lahima, and garima is the heaviness versus the lightness. But I had that ability to lift myself out of the bed, and I could practice that. And when I started going on all those Dalai Lama journeys to see His Holiness speak, I became fascinated with the Tibetan lamas who can change their body temperature.
Yes.
And you can watch them. Like, I watched one in Washington, D.C., who was chanting, and you could see the sweat just pouring off of his head, and he's sitting there just chanting. And it was so cool to like see that. And I used to go to the gym and I'd play on the treadmill with my heartbeat, because you can watch your heartbeat and see, can I make it faster? Can I make it slower? Can I shift that to play with it? And so it's just, they're so fascinating.
Yes. Well, look, as you're speaking about the Dalai Lama, I had a dream with His Holiness some years ago now, I think in the 90s. And, I woke to lucidity in the dream. And then I found myself being pulled. There was an energetic pull that took me several houses down the street. And I was outside, standing by the side of a swimming pool. And His Holiness the Dalai Lama was there. And I was just beyond happy to see him. And I did pranam. And he's just laughing at me. And then he said, I'm going to teach you a new method of meditation. So I said, yes, please. So he dived, he just jumped into the deep end of the pool. And I knew I should follow him. We floated down to the bottom of the pool. He sat cross-legged, and I did the same. And then the message I got from him was, slow your breath down and stay in meditation on one breath. And I was able to do that in the dream state. And I realized this teaching is fundamental in Tibetan Buddhist trainings with the monks. They're taught that to try and slow, and yogis, master yogis do it as well. And they can stay in meditation for a long time on one breath. And again, it's part of the siddhis, the supernatural powers, to be able to do that.
Well, and that's inspiring, because that links to, when the Tibetan lamas pass away, oftentimes their body does not decay. And His Holiness has actually submitted bodies of lamas to science so they can study that, because it's such a fascinating thing that, like you're saying, on that one breath, where their bodies just continue to have this vitality even when the spirit has left the body, which I think is super interesting. And I'm curious, while we're talking about this and we're setting this up, and for everybody who's just joining, I see that some of you are just joining the live. We're talking about siddhis, or supernatural powers. So if you look at, the classic text explanation of the siddhis. Ordinary abilities like intuition and creativity are these natural gifts that we can cultivate, and siddhis are considered supernormal experiences that are expansions of consciousness.
Yes.
And so I'm curious, Julie, because you've written about so many spontaneous mystical experiences in your book, and you've shared books, and you've shared them here. And I wonder about the modern interpretation of siddhis. Like, do we think that psychic abilities, mediumship, energy healing are those modern expressions of siddhis? And how do we know when something crosses into the siddhi territory versus not? I want to talk about that because I think you and I both have had interesting experiences ourselves, and also we know what we can cultivate. So I want to talk about that for everybody who's watching and is like, well, can I do that?
Yeah. I mean, what I would say is psychic abilities are micro expressions of the siddhis. They're, I would say that, yeah, as you said, they're easier to cultivate. Whereas the siddhis, the supernatural powers that kind of arrive spontaneously. It's not like you can make a decision to try and decide, for example, to make yourself really, really small or really, really big. It just doesn't work that way. The siddhis show up after a shift of consciousness, and they do so naturally, and they do so in a way that shows you and reinforces the recognition that you're not the body, you're not the mind, and you're all of life itself. From what I've seen, both in my own direct experience of the siddhis and from what other people have shared, they usually occur after a fairly, I would say, big shift of consciousness. That's how I would describe that.
I agree. And I don't really know that there's a magic formula for it either, because I think, and I think it's interesting if we talk about the lucid dream initiation experiences you and I have had too, because I think those fall in line, in my opinion, siddhis. And sometimes I've had an experience simply because I'm out of my own way. Like you're saying, when we go to sleep and we're in that, shift of consciousness, I think, and you can let go, I think they can happen. But I've also had moments where I've had profound clarity from doing shadow work. So I'll have this awakening or this expansion of consciousness because it's like, oh my God, I see the truth of myself, whether I like it or not. And it's typically right after that I'll have an initiation dream, or I'll have some kind of siddhis experience. And do you think flying is also that? I mean, I think astral travel and flying dreams are supernatural, really, aren't they?
Yes, I would say so. And let me first of all speak to what you were just saying about shadow work. What happens is when you have a shift of consciousness, there's this recognition, even if it's just momentary, there's this recognition, there's a seeing, I'm not the mind, I'm not the body, I'm not my emotions, I'm not the story. There's a seeing of that, right? And it can be really dramatic, or it might be more subtle. But the thing is, once you've seen that, you can't close it down. So, and the thing is, that kind of awareness and that recognition just gets bigger and bigger and bigger. And of course, what happens is when you're doing your shadow work, the place from which this vastness, you are this vastness, but this place from which you are seeing the shadow work is source itself. And so after you've had a shift of consciousness, you recognize this, you start doing your shadow work and start seeing through some of the patterns and the conditioning and all of those things, then there is a natural kind of further expansion, which then leads to more lucid dreams, or, more siddhis developing, or even more psychic abilities kind of blowing up and getting bigger. So it's this continual expansion that goes and goes and goes and goes. And in my view, from what I've seen, there's no limit to it. It's infinite.
Yeah, I agree. And I think it's really, you know, what you're cultivating in the moment. And I don't have, like I said, I haven't experienced a magic formula, because I think it's happened. It is spontaneous. It's a spontaneous experience. And it comes from something that has happened in my life, but it's never the same thing. It's not like every time I do shadow work, I have a supernatural experience. And sometimes it comes out of nowhere. I had one of my dearest friends passed away right before COVID of breast cancer. And it was, I don't know, it was like 3 or 4 years later that suddenly I'm in an experience with her that also transcended anything I could have expected and just filled me with joy. And it also was, you know, I was seeing the planet with her. There were different things. And so I think even those experiences, you can't really predict when they're coming. And believe it or not, this is going to be interesting. This is the first time Julie and I have ever done these short series, and it's already been, 20 minutes. We're just getting started. So for everybody who's joining us, I hope you come right back, but we're going to actually leave and come back. And we're going to talk specifically, we're going to get into some of the specifics. We're actually going to talk through the cities and the cultural places that they come from. But we're just getting started, because Julie and I have plenty of experiences to share with you. And I hope that you have some to share with us as well. So Julie, if you're ready, we're going to leave. We're going to come back in about 6 minutes and talk about the cities very specifically. So any last thoughts we want to leave them with before we head over there, Julie?
Well, what I would say is, if you are interested enough to come onto this channel to even, pay attention to what we're talking about, you must have had some experience of a city. Otherwise, you wouldn't be here.
So true. So true. And we want to hear about it. So
yes.
We will see all of you right back here on Buddhist Biohacker in just a couple minutes. Bye, everyone.